So, up until now, we have only discussed mapping this singular table over here, whether it was introducing a enum, temporal types, a blob field. Now, let's start mapping our relationship. Let's understand a few terms before we start mapping our relationships. Now, the table which contains the foreign key in the relationship is known as the owner of the relationship. It is also known as child side of the relationship. The table on the other side is known as the inverse side or the parent side of the relationship. Basically, child contains the foreign key of the parent side. So we are going to follow a three-step procedure for mapping any kind of relationships. Now let's consider our one-to-one mapping. Now the first step is you have to map the non-relationship attributes. Non-relationship attributes are every attribute except the foreign key attribute. So this three over here and this three over here. So that's what I mapped. We already know what entity annotation is, ID annotation, generated value, its identity because we are auto incrementing. Now, the second stage is we have to consider this attribute, which is the relationship attribute. Now, one case is one animal and which we have written over here. So, we put that field over here, one cage containing one animal. And then one animal belongs to one cage. So, that's what we put over here. In the animal entity, we put one field with the cage attribute, and then we label it as one to one because the relationship is one to one from both sides. Now in the third stage we have to tell the mapping that which side contains the foreign key. Now in our case cage contains the foreign key, and whichever side contains the foreign key we mention an annotation named join column. So in our case we have a join column over here, and the name attribute will contain the name of the foreign key. On the other side, we just mention an attribute with the value animal, which is over here. We say that this one-to-one mapping is mapped by this attribute. We do not mention this, we mention field which maps the attribute. So it's mapped by this field. So let me just repeat this procedure once again. The first step involves mapping the non-relationship attributes, that is basically the attributes which are not the foreign key. So here it is. The second stage involves you to add the relationship attribute, that is you since the relationship is one to one from both sides, the cage has one instance of animal, the animal has one instance of a cage in it, and you mark the relationship appropriately like it's one to one from both sides. The third stage involves placing the join column annotation. So the side containing the foreign key will have a join column annotation, the other side will just have a mapped by attribute with the value of the field which actually maps the join column. Now let's actually code it. Now the first step is mapping the non-relationship attribute, that is all the attributes except the foreign key. So here I already done that. So in the cage table, the cage number, location and cage ID were the non-key attributes, rather the non-relationship attributes. So I've already put them all along with their getters and setters, and so for the animals. Okay, so I've introduced the column annotation because the field name was not the column name in the table. Now the second step is introducing the relationship attribute. Now the relationship is one to one from both sides because cage has one instance of an animal belongs to one instance of cage. So let's code it. So in our case, animal has one to one relationship with cage and cage has one to one relationship with animal. Now the third step is putting the join column annotation in the table which, or basically the side which contains the foreign key. So in our case cage contains the foreign key, so there's a join column on this side, and on the other side we say the attribute has been mapped by this field of the entity. So let's code it. So in our cage has a join column, name is this. We didn't need to actually put this, so I'll just delete this off. And on the animal side we saying that it's mapped by this field. We are not saying this actual foreign key, we are saying the field of the entity which maps it, which is mentioned over here. So till now we actually coded a relationship, but instead of that, let's let the ID do the work first. So let's generate entity classes from the database. Now we'll just tick this off, include related tables, because we are only concerned with tables which we want right now. After that we won't tick this off. So animal and cage, just add this. Next we will just uncheck this. We haven't studied any of this right now, and that will be fine. Now let's see the classes generated. So you can see there's a join column annotation with one-to-one relationship with animal, and in animal table there is a one-to-one relationship mapped by this attribute which is mentioned over here. So as you can see, the IDE makes the things very simple for us. Let me just point out one thing. In our case, we did a mapping on both sides. That is, there was a one-to-one relationship on this side and this side. This is known as bidirectional relationship, but this is not compulsory. You can have a relationship just from one side. So we could have easily dropped the cage field along with its annotation. So basically it's all going to depend on the requirements of your application. If you're not going to access the animal from the cage side, then you can just drop this side. If you're not going to access this side, then you can just drop this side. It's all upon the requirements of your application. But anyways, the side containing a join column is required because you need to mention the physical annotation. You need to mention which is the foreign key. Now let's consider one-to-many mapping between category and animal. One category can have many animals in it, one animal can belong to one category. Now one-to-many mapping, or if you see it from the other side, it's many-to-one mapping, is very similar to one-to-one mapping. Now let's see the first stage, that is map the non-relationship attributes. So non-relationship attributes are every attribute except the foreign key. So it has two attributes over here and it has three attributes over here. Now the second stage is you have to account for this relationship attribute. So on this side, one category can have many animals. So instead of a singular attribute, we now have a list of animals, and the annotation is one to many because one category can have many animals, and on this side one animal can belong to just one category. So we mention a singular attribute, we do not mention a list over here, and the annotation is many to one. So this is one to many side and this is many to one side. Now the third stage is like before. In one-to-one relationship, you have to put the join column on the side containing the foreign key. Now animal contains a foreign key related to the primary key of category table. So on animal side we put a join column with the name containing the foreign key name, and on the other side we say it's mapped by which field. It's mapped by category. So we mention over here, we don't mention this, we mention which field maps it. It's already mapped by join column, so we have to just mention the field over here. Now let's start with the first step. Let's code it. The first step is mapping the non-relationship attribute. Category has two non-relationship attributes, animal has three non-relationship attributes. So I have already done that. So here animal has three attributes, and I generated the getters and setters for all of them, and so for this two attributes along with the getters and setters. Now the second stage is accounting for the foreign key, that is adding the relationship attribute and setting the proper annotation. For example, category has many animals, so it's one to many from this side. For animal, it is just having, or it just belongs to one category, so it's just a singular attribute over here with the annotation being many to one. So the second stage is adding the relationship attribute. So I've added a relationship attribute. A category has many animals, so we have taken a list of animals. An animal has just one category, and it's a many to one relationship from animal side. It's one to many relationship from category side. Now the third stage is you have to introduce the join column on the side containing the foreign key, or basically the side who is the owner of the relationship or the child side. So join column over here because this contains the foreign key with with name attribute containing the name of the foreign key. And on the other side, we have to use the map by attribute and containing the value of the field which maps it. So animal table which contains the foreign key, we introduce a join column with the name of the join column, that is the name of the foreign key. And on the category side, we used a map by attribute with the name of the field, that is category ID over here and its category ID over here. So basically I've just auto generated the tables using the ID. I'm actually not happy with the name given over here. One animal doesn't have a category ID, just so I'll just modify this over here. Okay, I change the name over here, and since I changed the name over here, the mapped by attribute is going to change over here. Okay, again as in one-to-one relationship, one-to-many relationship or many-to-one relationship do not have to be bidirectional. In our case it was. So if we can easily just drop off this attribute along with that related annotation, and will just work fine. So basically it all depends upon the requirement of your application. Now let's use the ID to auto generate the entities first. Right click, new entity, classes from database, and animal, let's uncheck this, animal and category, add, next, let's uncheck this, next, let's use list as a collection, next, and here are auto generated entities. So animal has many-to-one relationship with category, and category has one-to-many relationship. It's mapped by this, and I said I'm not happy with this, so let's change this. Let's select this and let's say rename, refactor rename, and let's rename it category. And for this side, it is already renamed it. Refactor has worked for this also.